This is a video on what will replace Facebook. First of all, the problem of Facebook is it represents a person, any of us, as one thing. This is a fundamental error. We perform different selves, actually subsets of ourselves, for different audiences in our life. And we want some of those selves to be completely opposite and distinct from others. We want some of them to overlap with others. We want some of them to cooperate and others to compete with others. So we have facets, I would call them, of ourselves. And the Facebook thing has one facet, as if we want our friends or people who have access to 100% of who we are. So that's the first error. Number two, we establish, and this is a flaw in Google Circles as well as Facebook, we establish who we share information with primarily by security concerns, not by interests. And Google Plus and Facebook make the mistake of thinking that information boundaries are primarily determined by shared interests. In an ideal world where everybody is nice and lovely and sweet and never does bad things, that would be true. But you have to be an Asperger syndrome little boy nut from Stanford's computer science department to think that the world is like that. In the real world, when we have information, we primarily ask ourselves, who can we trust to give this information to? They will either not handle it at all or handle it with full obedience to and knowledge of our restrictions on it, or with sharing exactly the same views and values about its handling as we would. So sharing information is primarily through a security concern of trust, boundaries of trust, not boundaries of the same interest. And Facebook and Google Plus make a severe error by thinking that the boundaries are interest boundaries and not security boundaries. I can trust this kind of information to the following people, but I can't trust it to these other people. And you have to earn trust, and that's what building relationships is earning trust for new kinds of mutual disclosure of more and more realistic, flawed, and risky information. And that's how people build relationships, through security boundaries and trust. And Facebook and Google Plus both mistake this. Number three, there is a Chinese social media startup whose product has a possible buy button. It's in Chinese, the Chinese character for buy, with a question mark after it. And you click that button, and it goes to gadget sites and Gizmodo and Apple News releases and manufacturing and news announcements, product announcements, technical columns in the New York Times, and it automatically, using what it knows about you, collects products you might be interested in from all those sources and puts them in a kind of spreadsheet of 40 columns by 20 rows on my large computer screen. And it's inaccurate in part. About a third of it's got me wrong, but about two-thirds of it's on target, and it's an immense automation of my interests. And I really can't understand why Facebook hasn't already done it, and why Google hasn't already done it, why a lot of these other people hasn't done it. So there's a freshness to Chinese imagination, which I really like in their social media products. That's the third element missing from Google Plus and Facebook. Fourth, if you look at the technology involved, it's really just two things. Email lists, so you can send one message to 20 people or 50 people with just putting one message up. And that's what this posting thing is on walls. And then photos, sharing photos. Sharing photos and emailing lists. Those two technologies have been around for 30, 40 years. So technically there's almost nothing new in Facebook and Google Plus. And once you realize how little technology is there, and you got to shuffle some memory around to handle the volume of email messaging and the volume of photos uploaded. But other than server farm management for the volume of memory involved, extremely little is technically there. And this can be demonstrated by asking yourself a few simple questions. How many good new friends did you make because of Google Plus or Facebook over the last 5 years? The answer for most of us by far is zero, absolutely zero. And the failure of these social sites to be social in terms of adding social value to us is quite substantial. And so they are indexing all of our activities and information for advertisers and people who want to sell things and advertise to us. But that apparently is so shallow and faulty that it doesn't do any good to suggest people that might be interesting to us, that we might share interest and eventually trust with. And then there's the issue of relationships support with individuals, so that the history of a relationship is visibly graphed instead of the history of one person, because it's the history of the relationship we want to review to determine whether there's too little trust there to really bother developing this anymore, or whether there's enough trust there that this could go one step further, and it's worthwhile trying to make that extension, take the risk and make that extension. So there's very little support for relationship building. And given the information that they have for advertising, these applications do almost nothing to suggest good possible new friends for us or acquaintances for us.